Since 1945, whatever we have thought of as international order and international law is actually very, very badly degraded, to the point I would say that in the next 10 years it will be very obvious that international order does not exist. So what Professor Vanaik is suggesting, that these middle powers, other powers are going to take their chances at doing things which aren't in the greater good of the world, is going to increase. You know, in 2024, they counted 61 conflicts involving state actors, which involved 39 states of such conflicts since 1946. So this is not some made-up figure that international order is going away. The number of conflicts that the UN is able not to prevent or to stop is in fact at a record level. So we are dealing with that. We are dealing with the nature of what the so-called underpinning states, you know, those states that were supposed to guarantee international order, they are the ones that are violating international order. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine comes into that bracket. US's kidnapping of the Venezuelan president Maduro is part of that. Israel, you know, we're talking about Israel, and of course we're referring to the fact that Israel has broken all these international tenets, the targeting of civilians, 70,000 dead, 20,000 of them children, all of that. What about the UN itself? They have killed more than 100 UN officials in this war. United Nations officials who are never supposed to be targeted have actually died. The UN Secretary General, supposed to be the symbol of the UN, is banned from visiting Israel. He cannot get a visa to go to Israel. So we are looking at a flouting of this international order from all respects. And it's not one or the other, and I agree. You know, it's Iran, it's China, it's so many countries around the world that are doing it, that I do think that in the next few years itself, we need to not just discuss India's position as a permanent member of the UN, reformed UN Security Council. I think we really need to think hard about whether that United Nations has the capacity anymore to say things like never again, to say things like no more nuclear wars. And if they don't, then what is going to do it? There are many suggestions out there already about what can replace the UN. I still think the UN is the most credible organization that has brought these together, but I do think that the conversation on a new international order has to start today itself. I think India has always had a moral stature and has been able to punch above its weight, given its GDP per capita, simply because it has taken positions that count. Look at just this war. I mean, I'm not even talking about all that has happened prior to 2026. But if you look at just this war, it is a war started by a UN Security Council permanent member. It is a war that has absolutely no basis. The US itself is not saying it was in self-defense, right? So the UN Charter has been broken there itself. Then you come to the next level, which is that targeting has been done by completely unregulated artificial intelligence. That is why a school in which 168 little girls were killed could be targeted, because AI was allowed to use the targeting. You are talking about nuclear, threat, or at least nuclear insecurity by the targeting. If you remember at the beginning of the war, Iranians came out and had human chains outside nuclear installations because they were worried that those were going to get attacked as well. So you're doing a lot of things that, you know, tell us that there is no international law being used. The Strait of Hormuz blockade is another part. The double blockade by the US is another violation of international law. So you're seeing international law being hit again, and again, and yet we are not hearing India's voice. And that, I think, is the bigger tragedy than whether we have friends with us or whether Pakistan is a mediator or anything else. A ship with 100 sailors on it gets bombed by the US in the Indian Ocean, not far from India. They had come as India's guests, and yet they are bombed, and yet we are unable to speak about it. Even when Indians are killed aboard some of these ships in the Indian Ocean by our Quad partner, our voice is not raised. So to me, the bigger worry is not who are my friends and who else is standing with me today. The bigger worry for me is, where is my voice?
The relationship with international law and force has always been a relationship with force and international law. Force can change international law. That force can be the force of states and governments, or it can be the force of popular movements. For example, the decolonization process, which then led to changes in laws and so on. But what you're having, of course, at the economic level and the political level, as very recently as Suhasini has also said, you are finding the fact that more and more countries are just exercising their power irrespective of international laws. And this is something that is escalated to a greater extent than earlier. There have been variations in the way in which international law has been respected. Look at the situation in Palestine. What governments are doing anything about it? The states moved closer to Israel, but in civil society, in Europe and North America, and to some extent in Palestinians over here. So this question of international law, it means that more and more countries are thinking that they can get away by doing what is exercise the power. And please understand, this doesn't just mean Israel or US. It means countries like India, which also is a bully in its own area, and rationalizes that bulliness in terms of we are important, we are a stabilizing force. It's not just India, it's Iran. It's not just Iran, it's Turkey. It's not just Turkey, it can be other countries also. So the point is that this is also breaking out here. But any idea that this constitutes multipolarity, be very careful. Middle powers are not going to seriously challenge the big two or the big three, and they cannot do that. What they're trying to do is maneuver it in the name of multipolarity and saying, oh, we're doing good. Please remember that all states are structurally biased states, and they're structurally biased in favor of the rich and the powerful, which will change laws as they want to, or if they can, or they will disregard it. But be very careful about identifying yourself in the name of national interest with structurally biased states. You can decide what policies you support, but you should always have as your vantage point, not what is good for India or Turkey or Israel, but what is good for the poorest and the most oppressed sections of society. And maybe this is better than that or that. That vantage point is very, very important. And we miss that vantage point if we fall in the trap of taking this idea of national interest that seriously, because the agent of national interest is supposed to be the state, and states everywhere are structurally biased in a fundamental way. The great difference between Nehru, Gandhi, and earlier is that they fought and were leaders of mass movements and recognized the importance of morality. And therefore what they had was a greater combination of morality and pragmatism. What you now have is what is called realist pragmatism covered up by references to morality, which is very different from the past.
I think from the very beginning, there's been so much talk about how Pakistan was able to do this, and have they, stolen a march on India. Our External Affairs Minister using that very unparliamentary word for what Pakistan was doing. But I think it is very clear that Pakistan played that role for two basic reasons. One, because its leadership had the trust of the United States leader. And second, because it has no diplomatic ties with Israel. So for Iran, the push factor vis-a-vis Pakistan was essentially that they did not want an Israeli proxy in the room, apart from, as he mentioned, the two interlocutors from the US themselves. And I think that is a unique position. That is not a position anybody else can take. If Oman and Qatar also helped with the talks, but Pakistan was, able to provide it at that particular moment when Oman and Qatar were themselves in the middle of the conflict. So I'm not sure that has changed Pakistan's stature in the world. I think it certainly disappointed a lot of people, even within our government, that there wasn't a greater, revulsion to Pakistan, particularly after all that happened last year. But I don't see it as, as a kind of strategic game changer. So I'll just stop there. I think Pakistan was chosen for a specific reason. They, in fact, did a very good job of carrying out the procedure of bringing these interlocutors to Islamabad, to have them come up with an MoU at all, to have them sign an MoU at all, to have the US extend its ceasefire week after week. All of these are, credit to Pakistan for having been able to do it. But I'm not sure that this leads to some new global role for it.
I just want to quickly ask Suhasini a follow-up. Sorry, on the Pakistan question, because I mean the sort of the Indian social media's obsession with Pakistan in general is embarrassing. But from another perspective, what you said, that Pakistan being chosen for a very specific role, would Asim Munir see it that way, or would he see it as in a sense? A validation of his stature in the White House, and given what happened in Pahalgam last year, we just had another big terror attack where a policeman was killed in Anantnag a few days ago, which was the first major strike in Kashmir since Pahalgam. So is there a worry that this may embolden the Pakistani army to try something in Kashmir or somewhere else again soon?
So obviously that is something India always worries about, that anything that makes Pakistan feel extra confident ends up with something going wrong in India, or certainly at the LOC or the border. Again, I think this is a specific moment in time. Only, frankly, Asim Munir knows what is the conversation he and Donald Trump had in the White House over that lunch on, I think, June 17th or 18th last year. So what was the nature of the questions that were asked, the demand from the US, which we know at the time was that Pakistan should not somehow get involved militarily to support Iran. Because at that time also, attacking Iran was on the US agenda. They'd already carried out one round. What was it that Pakistan asked for in return? Did it ask for a greater role in the neighborhood? Did it ask for example, there's been a suggestion that the US's reversion of Indo-PACOM to PACOM comes from the Pakistani unhappiness over the Indian Ocean, which also has Pakistan also borders the Indian Ocean, as a kind of Indian dominance. Were the requests for more? Were they for talks between India and Pakistan to be pushed? And you mentioned IISS, which has actually been in the news for a different conference in Sri Lanka, where we had a former Indian Army chief as well go, and Pakistani generals were present as well. So we still don't know where that is leading. What we do know is that there is some kind of an understanding between the US and Pakistan right now. There is even the possibility that the US wants India not to up the ante with Pakistan at this time. I certainly thought it was interesting that on the 1 year anniversary of the terrible Pahalgam attacks, that the statements made by the Indian leadership did not mention Pakistan. We don't know at what point Pakistan has asked for that bargain, but whether it can actually do it, whether it can actually overstep either militarily with India or step out of its current economic situation and make some international splash in the world, I'm not sure.
I've been there before, but this was in very special circumstances. They had suffered such grievous loss. They had been presumably shaken up by the kind of attacks that they suffered, and they lost their top leaders of the military as well as their spiritual leader. But there wasn't any rancor, there wasn't any anger, there wasn't any bitterness, just enormous amount of confidence about the way ahead. And it seemed to me that if a country in such circumstances is to be seen and admired for putting its act together, what I saw in Iran was certainly an eye-opener. And something that I specifically noticed, and I do want to say this, and I'm sure that the ladies on the panel will appreciate this, that I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of women going about in a normal way, some wearing hijab, many wearing hijab, some not wearing hijab, some traveling on two-wheelers on the road, going past the buses and coaches that were taking us. And the photographers that were following us around, at least 95% of those photographers were women. A lot of them were hijab dressed, of course, but they were women. And they were protocol people were largely women. For somebody that believes that Iranian society keeps its women backwards, is I think something that requires to be looked at afresh. But I was very pleased that despite whatever may have happened, and you've just heard about the reactions of our country at various steps when we have been a bit reticent, that we've been a bit timorous, that we've been careful about saying something on Iran. But I thought that they were wonderful with us as Indians. There was an official delegation as well, which went just briefly to make a presentation and return. But I found that they had a very strong urge to keep a solid relationship with India. And when we speak of a civilizational bond between India and Iran, that was so apparent and so obvious in the manner in which they treated us. And I want to share with you the good fortune I had was that at the commemoration meeting, the memorial meeting for the Supreme Leader, there were various countries, largely from the Arab world and from the Muslim world, who came and made their presentations. And when I was asked to speak, I was chuffed by the fact that the delegation, which was not the formal delegation that I carried, but there were delegation which merged itself naturally, organically, enhanced humanity, because we represent here from India people from several religions, which means Islam, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Christianity. We all come here today to join you in the spirit in which you celebrate the martyrdom of your great leader and you remember your great leader. We add that element of humanity to it by saying that the humanity today has to come together, because the future of our children depends on how the generations today can come together. So thank you very much for taking this opportunity to come here. I just wanted to add finally that it has been our effort, and I'm grateful to Iqbal Saab and of course Siraj Hussain Saab and Shamam